That night, while a whiteout blizzard swallowed the Oregon forest whole, Ben, a retired firefighter living alone at a closed campground, wanted nothing more than a hot cup of coffee and a way to sleep through the howling wind. Then the porch camera blinked to life, and he saw something no one would believe: a thin white cat and a thin black cat lying in the teeth of the storm, wrapped tight around a soaking wet Bobcat Kitten that was shaking on his doorstep.
Get inside,
They could
quickly.
have walked
It's too
away
cold
and
out
saved
here.
themselves. Yet they chose to risk their lives to warm a wild creature that wasn't even their kind. Ben had no idea that the moment he opened that door, his quiet, lonely life and this silent stretch of woods would be pulled into a strange story where kindness, danger, and the hardest goodbye of his life would all collide. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. By the time the wind really started to scream, Ben Carter had already turned the television off. There was no point trying to hear anything over the storm. The little weather radio crackled now and then on the counter, voices from town warning people to stay indoors, to avoid travel unless it was absolutely necessary. Out here at the closed campground on the edge of the Oregon forest, there was nowhere to go anyway. Just him, the cabin, and the snow. The old man rubbed his hands together and held them closer to the wood stove, feeling the dry heat push back against the damp chill that had seeped into his knuckles. 55 wasn't supposed to feel this stiff, he thought. But decades of running into burning buildings had a way of taking what they wanted from your joints. These days his life was simple: check the trails, clear fallen branches, keep an eye on the empty campsites until spring. It was the kind of quiet some people promised themselves with retirement planning and careful savings, the dream in all those glossy brochures. But there were nights like this one when the silence felt less like peace and more like an echo. A gust hit the west wall hard enough to rattle the dishes in the cupboard. The windows buzzed in their frames. Snow skated sideways past the glass, more like thick white smoke than flakes, blurring the line between sky and ground. The kind of storm that made people grateful for home insurance and solid walls, Ben thought vaguely, even out here where the nearest neighbor was 10 miles away. He reached for the coffee mug cooling beside the radio and stopped. A pale blue light blinked in the corner of his eye, steady and insistent. The little monitor for the security camera over the porch had woken up. Ben frowned. Nobody should be out here. The campground gate had been locked for weeks. He set the mug down, wiped his hands absently on his flannel shirt, and crossed the room. The floorboards gave their familiar creak under his boots, a sound that had begun over the winter to sound less like an old house and more like a voice reminding him he was the only human left inside it. He tapped. The button and the screen flickered, lines rolling once before the image snapped into focus. For a second, he thought the lens was fogged. The world on the screen was a blur of white and swirling gray, snow whipping past the porch light in frantic sheets. The microphone hissed with the low roar of wind around the cabin eaves. Then the camera adjusted, the brightness dipping, and shapes emerged from the storm. 3 dark smudges huddled together near the top step. Ben leaned in, breath fogging the glass of the monitor. The porch boards, usually a dull brown, were dusted with a thin layer of ice crystals that caught the light. Against that pale surface, the shapes you sharpened, 2 stray cats he recognized immediately. They'd been drifting around the campground since late autumn, ghosts at the edge of the trees line, showing up more regularly after he started setting out leftover stew and dry kibble in a dented metal bowl. One was white, almost too white for the forest, short-haired, narrow, with ears that looked a little too big for her head. The other was solid black, thick-bodied, with yellow eyes that flashed in the camera sometimes like twin coals. Tonight, though, the 2 weren't prowling or pacing. They were wrapped around something. The white cat was pressed so close that her thin body looked almost melted into the shape between them. Her fur was plastered with wet, clinging to bony shoulders that rose and fell with fast, shallow breaths. The black cat had his back to the wind, fur blown sideways, shield stretched wide. His tail was wrapped tight around the small bundle in the center like a rope. The bundle moved. Ben squinted. The resolution wasn't great, but the porch light caught a glint of something. Spotted fur, not striped. Ears rounded, not pointed, a tiny jaw trembling. The creature in the middle lifted its head a fraction, mouth opening in a silent cry the microphone couldn't catch. Snowflakes stuck and melted along its whiskers. A bobcat kitten. Out here, on his porch, cradled between two strays who could have just as easily walked away. The white cat bent her head and began to lick the kitten's face with frantic, short strokes, as if she could scrub the cold right out of its bones. The black tom pressed closer, eyes narrowed against the blast, his body taking the brunt of the wind. Every few seconds, he flicked his ears back toward the door like he was waiting for it to open. Ben's throat tightened. The sound of the storm receded for a moment, replaced by a low hum in his ears that reminded him of another night, another emergency, another door that had refused to budge. Smoke, not snow, had filled his vision then. There had been a child's bicycle on the lawn, half melted. An upstairs window glowing orange. His captain's voice in his radio, sharp and urgent. The memory came with the bitter tang of burned plastic and the metallic taste of fear in the back of his mouth. He blinked it away and looked back at the screen. The kitten sagged, its head knocking lightly against the white cat's chest. Its tiny sides fluttered under the spotted fur, breath so shallow he could barely see it. Pearl, he'd started calling the white one that, in his head weeks ago, shifted, curling tighter, trying to cover the kitten's bare paws. The black tom, Shadow, lowered his head until his chin rested on the little animal's back, snow building up along his spine like a second freezing coat. "They're going to freeze out there," Ben muttered, voice hoarse in the empty room. The monitor threw a cold, pale glow across his face, highlighting the lines at the corners of his eyes, the gray in his beard. He could stay where he was. The storm was bad, the porch slick. No one would blame a man his age for choosing warm air and a hot stove over ice and risk. There was no chief here to bark orders, no partner depending on him to make the right call. The world wouldn't end if 3 stray lives slipped quietly away in the dark. But the sight of those 2 cats, giving every ounce of warmth they had to something smaller and weaker, hit him in a place that wasn't interested in logic or risk assessments. It reached down through layers of ash and old grief to the part of him that had once run into houses when everyone else was running out, the part that believed some things were worth stepping into the line of fire for. He grabbed his heavy coat from the peg by the door, feeling the familiar weight pull down on his shoulders. The zipper rasped up under his chin. He jammed his feet into his boots, not bothering with laces, and pulled a knit cap down over his ears. The air at the threshold was colder, sharp enough to make his lungs ache on the first breath. When he flipped the deadbolt and cracked the door, the storm leaped at him like an animal, claws of wind scraping ice against the floorboards. The porch light haloed the snow in harsh yellow, turning every flake into a tiny falling blade. For a heartbeat, he paused, letting the cold slap his face awake. Then he stepped out into it, the door banging shut behind him, and headed toward the 3 trembling shadows huddled on his porch. The wind shoved at his back as he crossed the porch, boots slipping on the thin glaze of ice. Up close, the 3 shapes were smaller than they'd looked on the screen. The white cat's fur was soaked flat against her ribs, her green eyes huge and glassy. The black tom's coat bristled, every hair tipped with frost. Between them, the bobcat kitten felt like a handful of wet rags when Ben slid his hands underneath. "Easy now," he murmured, more for himself than for them. The kitten was colder than the porch rail, cold in that strange, terrifying way that didn't feel like skin anymore. Its spotted fur was limp, ears folded back, whiskers beaded with tiny droplets that had almost turned to ice. When Ben lifted it, he felt a roughness along one hind leg. His thumb brushed a sticky ridge, and it came away dark. Blood. The white cat let out a thin, broken meow and clung to his wrist with her claws, not to scratch, but as if to anchor herself to the little body being taken away. The black Tom bared his teeth in a warning he didn't finish, then fell in beside Ben's boots as the man turned and pushed his way back through the door. Heat hit him in a wave, dry, woody, tinged with the faint, sweet smell of pine sap from the logs. After the metallic bite of the storm, the cabin air felt almost too warm, like stepping too close to a bonfire. The sudden temperature change made his cheeks sting and his eyes water. He kicked the door shut, flipped the deadbolt by habit, and moved straight to the old braided rug in front of the wood stove. The white cat followed at his heels, shaking each paw with tiny jerks, leaving a dotted line of melted snow. The Tom circled wide, tail low, pupils blown wide and shining in the stove's orange glow. "All right, let's see what we've got," Ben said under his breath. He grabbed an old flannel blanket from the back of the couch, spread it on the rug, and gently laid the kitten down. Up close, the spots were clearer, soft gray and tawny against a pale undercoat, like ash and ember mixed together. The little chest fluttered with quick, shallow breaths. One paw twitched, claws just barely extending, then curling back. The white cat immediately curled around the kitten's head, pressing her cheek against its ear, her body trembling with fine, constant shivers. The black Tom lay the other way, long spine curved along the kitten's back, his bulk forming a protective wall against the draft that crept under the door. "You two. You did all the hard work," Ben whispered. He reached for the first aid kit he kept on a shelf by habit. Years of knowing that emergencies didn't check your calendar. It was mostly stocked for hikers and clumsy campers. Bandages, antiseptic, a roll of vet wrap the previous ranger had left behind. As he flipped it open, the plastic hinges creaked, a small domestic sound over the hush of the storm and the steady tick of the stove. He eased the kitten's hind leg out from under the white cat, murmuring apologies when she tensed. The fur there was matted and sticky, darker than the rest. When he parted the hair with careful fingers, he saw the crescent of broken skin, bruised and raw. The edges were pinched in a way he recognized immediately. A trap. Old style, steel jaws, the kind nobody was supposed to be using anymore. Ben's jaw tightened. He'd seen similar wounds on dogs pulled out from under burned porches, on raccoons caught near illegal dumps. Always the same lazy cruelty. Set it and forget it. Let the metal do the work. No one around to see the suffering. No one around to pay the price. "Somebody out there's got no business calling themselves a hunter," he muttered. He cleaned the wound with warm water, dabbing gently with a folded piece of clean cloth. The kitten flinched once, a tiny cry startling the air, thin and raspy. It was the first real sound it had made, and it sliced straight through him. The white cat licked its nose as if to answer. The Tom shifted, his low rumble almost like a broken engine trying to turn over. "Hang in there, little guy," Ben said. "You're not in the cold anymore." He had to remind himself to move slowly, to breathe. This wasn't a blazing hallway with ceiling tiles raining down and radios screaming in his ear. This was a quiet living room, wood floors he'd swept himself, a fire he'd built log by log. Still, his hands shook faintly in that old familiar way as he wrapped the leg with gauze and a strip of blue vet wrap, snug but not too tight. The kitten's fur steamed slightly where the stove heat met the last of the snowmelt. The damp smell of wet animal hung in the cabin, mixing with pine smoke and the faint, bitter scent of antiseptic. It was the kind of earthy, real smell you never saw in glossy retirement planning brochures or those cheerful ads about comfortable life insurance and health insurance plans. Those pamphlets never showed the part where you ended up alone in the woods, kneeling on an old rug, trying to keep a wild baby cat from slipping away. When he finished, he sat back on his heels and took a long, steadying breath. The white cat was watching him, eyes narrowed, ears forward as if appraising his work. Her fur was beginning to fluff as it dried, returning from limp, wet strands to something closer to its usual soft white. "You," he said, pointing at her gently, "are one stubborn little nurse." Her pink nose twitched. The black Tom flicked his tail once, as though acknowledging the compliment on her behalf. Ben looked down at the kitten again. Its fur, now that it was drying, held a faint silver sheen along the edges of the spots, like ash catching light. The name formed in his mind without effort. "Ash," he said softly. "You look like you've been through the fire and back." The name felt right, settling into the air between them. He reached out and laid 2 fingers lightly along the kitten's side. The rise and fall of that tiny rib cage was still too fast, but it was there, steady, determined. Ash let out a faint, breathy sound and turned its head, pressing its nose clumsily into the heel of his hand. The touch was barely there, more of a lean than a nuzzle, but it was enough. Ben felt something move in his chest, a slow thaw he hadn't expected on a night like this. "Yeah," he murmured. "You're not quitting on me, are you?" Outside, the storm rattled the windows again, but it sounded a little farther away now. The wood stove popped, sending up a small shower of sparks behind the glass. Shadows from the firelight danced over the 3 small bodies on the blanket, white, black, and spotted gray, pressed together like they had made a pact. Ben pulled the blanket up around them a little tighter, tucking the edges in as carefully as he would have tucked sheets around a patient on a hospital gurney years ago. He stayed there longer than he needed to, just watching, listening to the shared rhythm of their breathing and the soft, almost inaudible purr that began deep in the white cat's chest. For the first time in a long time, the cabin didn't feel quite so empty. By morning, the storm had settled into a steady, muffled roar, like the ocean pressed up against the walls. The world outside the windows was nothing but white and a hint of dark tree trunks, soft and blurred, as if someone had erased the horizon with a sleeve. Inside the cabin, the air was warm and faintly smoky, carrying the sweet, familiar smell of coffee and burning pine. The contrast made Ben feel as if he lived between 2 different planets, one frozen, one beating quietly with its own small heart. Ash had shifted in the night. When Ben shuffled over in his wool socks, he found the Bobcat Kitten half sprawled across the white cat's neck, one bandaged leg stretched out like a crooked stick. Pearl lay on her side, eyes closed, purring in a deep, steady line that vibrated against Ash's ribs. The black Tom had moved closer to the stove, his glossy fur catching the orange light. He raised his head when Ben stopped nearby, yellow eyes sharp but no longer accusing. "Morning, Shadow," Ben said softly. "Still on duty, I see." The Tom flicked an ear as if to acknowledge the compliment. When Ben crouched down, his knees popped in protest, a dry crackle that made him wince. He reached out to test the kitten's warmth. The fur felt dry now, the skin underneath no longer icy but pleasantly warm, like a stone left in weak winter sun. Ash's breaths were slower, deeper. The frantic flutter from the night before had eased into something more stubborn and steady. He set a shallow dish of water and another of canned food near the blanket. The smell of meat drifted up, strong enough to curl at the edges of his nose. Pearl's eyes snapped open, bright green, and she rose at once, stretching herself into a thin, snowy arch. Shadow moved with more dignity, but Ben could hear the soft thump of his paws on the rug, the eager swish of his tail. They ate in quick, neat bites, glancing up often as if to make sure Ash was still there. When the adults were done, Ben used a spoon to mash a bit of the soft food with warm water. He held it close to the kitten's nose. Ash blinked, whiskers twitching, then licked once, twice, as if remembering how. The tiny tongue was surprisingly rough against the metal, the effort almost comical in its seriousness. Pearl came back and sat beside them, her tail wrapped around her paws, a little white nurse supervising every move. "This isn't exactly what the retirement planning books promised," Ben muttered with a crooked smile, "but it beats listening to infomercials about life insurance all night." His voice sounded different in the small room when he joked, lighter and unfamiliar. The cats didn't care, of course, but it felt good to hear it. He settled back against the couch, coffee mug warm between his palms, and watched the three of them breathe. Outside, snow hit the windows in soft, rhythmic taps, like fingers insisting they be let in. He hadn't meant to start talking about the past. It slipped out the way old smoke slipped from under a closed door, quiet at first, then suddenly everywhere. Maybe it was the way Ash's chest rose and fell, or the way Pearl had thrown her whole little body over his the night before. Maybe it was just that he hadn't had anyone to talk to who listened without interrupting. "There was this one house," he began, more to the fire than to them. "Two-story, white siding, big maple out front, middle of the night, January. Not this much snow, but enough to freeze the hose lines if you weren't careful." Shadow's ear twitched. Pearl curled closer to Ash, as if stories were another kind of heat. "We got the parents out," Ben went on, eyes fixed on the slow spin of sparks behind the stove glass. Dad came down the ladder half-dressed, Mom screaming behind him. You could smell the plastic burning before you even reached the door. My partner, Ray, he went back up for the kid. 10 years old, pink bike on the lawn. The memory came in color more vivid than anything in the cabin. Orange and black, the blue flash of emergency lights, the red smear of Ray's helmet as he disappeared into the smoke. Ben could almost hear the radio again, the static and shouted commands, the sudden silence when the roof gave way. His chest tightened, not with the sharp fear of that night, but with the dull, familiar ache that had lived there ever since. "I couldn't save him," he said quietly. The words hung in the warm air, heavier than the steam from his coffee. "Not the boy. Not Ray. Sometimes it feels like they're both still up there in that hallway, and I just walked away." The only answer was the tick of cooling metal in the stove and the soft hum of Pearl's purr. Ash shifted, tiny paws flexing. Without waking fully, the kitten rolled until his head bumped against Ben's boot. It was a small contact, barely more than a brush, but it grounded him, pulling him back from the charred edge of the memory. He looked down at the little spotted body, at the bandaged leg, and the fragile curve of the spine under damp fur. He thought of the steel jaws that had snapped shut in the dark, the long, cold crawl that must have brought Ash to his porch, the way Pearl and Shadow had wrapped themselves around him like a living shield. "I couldn't save them," he said, voice rough. Then, more firmly, "But maybe I can get this little guy through the winter." Ash's whiskers twitched. Pearl opened one eye, slow and content, and Shadow resettled nearer to Ben's foot, as if taking him at his word. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cabin, three small hearts beat in time, and for the first time in years, Ben felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. By the third day, the storm had burned itself out. The world outside the cabin settled into that strange, heavy quiet that comes after a big snow when every sound seems to land softer, as if the air itself were padded. The sky was a flat, pale gray, the color of an old dish towel, and the pines stood motionless under their white caps. Inside, Ash was standing on all four legs for the first time. Ben watched from the kitchen doorway, wiping his hands on a dish towel as the Bobcat Kitten took careful steps across the rug. The bandaged leg wobbled, but it held. Pearl walked right beside him, white tail held high, matching his pace like a little nurse helping a patient down a hospital hallway. Shadow trailed a step behind, broad and silent, his black fur making the stovelight look almost golden by comparison. Ash reached the edge of the rug and hesitated, toes spreading against the cold wooden floor. His whiskers quivered. Then he put one paw down, then another. Each tiny pad made a faint, sticky sound on the boards, like someone peeling tape away from glass. "Not bad for a guy who picked a fight with a steel trap," Ben said. The phone on the wall rang, a sharp, old-fashioned jangle that made everyone jump a little. Ash darted back to Pearl, tucking himself against her side. Shadow's tail puffed once, then settled. Ben lifted the receiver. "Carter." "Ben? It's Maya Torres," a woman's voice said. He could hear wind in the background, the rattle of a truck door. "You left a message about an injured Bobcat Kitten?" "Yeah," he said, glancing at the trio on the floor. "He's here. Leg was caught in some kind of trap. I patched him up best I could." "You mind if I swing by? I'm not far. I'd like to take a look, and we probably need to check the area for illegal traps." "The department isn't thrilled about that kind of thing." "Door's open," Ben said. "Metaphorically. I'll unlock it for you." He hung up, ran a hand through his hair, and looked around the cabin the way you do when company's coming, even if that company is just one wildlife biologist who's seen worse. The place smelled like coffee, wood smoke, and warm fur. Not bad, he decided. Honest. Maya arrived 20 minutes later, boots crunching on the packed snow, a government SUV parked crooked beside the buried picnic table out front. She was in her late 30s, dark hair braided under a wool cap, cheeks pink from the cold. When he opened the door, a swirl of icy air followed her in, carrying the sharp scent of exhaust and fir needles. "It smells good in here," she said, stomping snow from her boots. "Better than my truck, anyway." "Coffee and cat," Ben said. "Can't bottle that for an air freshener." Her eyes went straight to the blanket by the stove. "Is that him?" Ash froze, ears back, but Pearl stayed. Where she was, a tight white curl around his ribs. Shadow rose in a smooth, wary motion, positioning himself between Maya and the kitten, his yellow eyes narrowed. Maya crouched a few feet away, moving slowly. "Hey there, little guy," she murmured. "Mind if I take a look from here, Ben?" He nodded. Legs wrapped. Wound to look like an old-style steel trap. I cleaned it as best I could. "You did all right," she said, studying the bandage. "Breathing looks better. Eyes are clearer. If he were with his mother, I'd tell you to leave him where he was. But," she glanced at Pearl and Shadow, "looks like he found a different kind of family." For a moment, they just watched the three animals breathing together. The fire popped. Outside, a small slide of snow slipped from the roof, landing with a muffled whoomp. Maya straightened, her expression shifting from gentle to businesslike. "Here's the thing, Ben. If he makes it, he can't stay here forever. Bobcats are wild. They need space, territory, all that. And the longer he's around people, the harder it'll be for him to survive out there." Ben blew out a breath. "Figured you'd say that." "I know you're not trying to tame him," she added quickly. "You saved his life. That matters. But at some point, we're going to have to talk about getting him back into the forest. Safely, on his terms." He nodded, feeling the familiar tug of war inside, that old instinct to hold on to the things you managed to save, and the quieter voice that knew nothing stayed where you put it. Not people, not houses, not wild animals. Before that, Maya said, shrugging into her coat again, let's see where that trap came from. Ethan's on his way to meet us at the trailhead. Ethan was waiting by the gate, tall and broad-shouldered, in a green ranger jacket, snow up to his calves. His breath fogged the air as they shook hands. "Heard you picked up a guest," he said to Ben. "Figured we'd better make sure nobody comes back for him." They moved into the trees, boots squeaking on the crusted snow, branches dipped overhead, dropping cold clumps down the back of Ben's collar. The forest was quiet in that eerie winter way, every sound smoothed out. Their footsteps and the occasional call of a crow were the only noises. Maya led them along the faint trace of a game trail. "Tracks here," she said softly, pointing with her gloved hand. Small, round prints with faint pad marks, half filled with fresh snow. Could be the mother, or another bobcat. A few minutes later, they found the trap. It lay half buried beside a fallen log, rust blooming along the hinges, jaws stained dark. Maya knelt, brushing snow away. Ben felt his stomach tighten at the sight. The cruel curve of metal teeth, the chain disappearing under the frozen ground. "Illegal as it gets," Ethan said, voice flat. "No tag, no identification. Just set it and walk away." "Some people treat the woods like a free store," Maya muttered. She pulled a small evidence bag from her pocket. Near the trap, half hidden in the slush, lay the dull gleam of a spent rifle shell. She picked it up with 2 fingers, and they don't mind if the shelves scream. Ben stared at the trap, the shell, the messy boot prints frozen in the mud nearby. He thought of Ash's leg under his hands, the way the kitten had flinched at the water, the thin cry that had cut through his chest. A different kind of anger rose in him, slow and heavy, not the frantic firehouse kind, but something colder. "Whoever did this," he said, "they're going to come looking if they think there's still something to take." "That's what I'm worried about," Maya replied. She slipped the shell into the bag, the plastic crinkling in the still air. "We'll file a report, step up patrols. In the meantime, don't tell anyone about the bobcat. Not over coffee, not at the diner in town, not even the folks trying to sell you better health insurance at the post office." Ben huffed a small laugh despite himself. Can't sell what they don't know about. As they turned back toward the cabin, the sky had deepened to a soft, bruised blue, the kind that comes just before early winter dusk. Ben walked a little faster, thinking of the warm rectangle of light that would be spilling from his front window by now, and the 3 small shapes likely curled on the rug inside. The forest pressed close around them, beautiful and indifferent, and for the first time since Ash had arrived, Ben understood that the danger at his door wasn't just the weather. The days slid into a slow, steady rhythm, like the ticking of the old clock on Ben's wall. The storm clouds thinned and drifted east, leaving behind a sky the color of worn denim and drifts of snow that glowed bluish in the early morning light. The campground stayed closed and silent, the picnic tables buried to their knees. But inside the cabin, something small and fierce was coming back to life. Ash grew in tiny, noticeable ways. One morning, Ben woke and realized the kitten's body no longer fit neatly in the hollow of his palm. The little spine had more weight to it, the paws more substance. The bandaged leg, once held stiff and useless, now bore weight as Ash walked from the rug to the kitchen and back, claws clicking softly on the wood like tiny knitting needles. Pearl took her nursing duties seriously. She trotted after him on silent white feet, brushing her flank against his when he wobbled, licking his ears when he sat down too hard, and gave a tiny, offended chirp. Shadow played the sentry, stretched out near the door or under the window, his black fur soaking up any patch of sunlight like ink. When Ash tumbled too close to the draft, Shadow would simply shift his big body in the way, a silent, living windbreak. In the evenings, after checking the empty trails and knocking snow from the satellite dish, Ben settled into his armchair with a book or the old radio murmuring low. The water stove painted the walls in shades of orange and amber, the kind of warm colors you see in a glass of good bourbon. Ash used the time to explore. He stalked the fringes of the room with exaggerated care, belly low, ears forward, tail tip twitching. He pounced on dust motes, on the frayed corner of the rug, on Pearl's tail when she flicked it just a little too temptingly. Sometimes he chose bigger prey. One night, Ben felt a light thump against his boot and looked down to see Ash clinging to his sock, eyes wide and bright. The kitten had launched from halfway across the room, a perfect little arc of muscle and intent. "Easy there, Tiger," Ben said, laughing despite the pinpricks in his ankle. "You're not exactly a lap cat, are you?" Ash released him and sat back, chest puffed out, as if perfectly aware he was something wilder. His eyes caught the firelight, not the soft, round glow of Pearl's, but a sharper, molten gold that made Ben think of headlights in smoke and the way danger sometimes looked almost beautiful from the wrong angle. It struck him in quiet moments like that how strange his life would sound to most men his age. They worried about mortgage payments and whether their life insurance policy was good enough, watched financial news, and argued with their financial advisors about interest rates. He worried about whether a Bobcat Kitten was putting too much weight on a healing leg and if 2 strays were getting enough calories to keep their ribs from showing. Somewhere along the way, his retirement planning had turned into something no brochure could have predicted. Outside, the forest kept whispering at the windows. On still nights, when the wind held its breath, he could hear the faint rush of the creek under the ice and the distant creak of trees shifting their weight. Ash heard it too. More and more, the kitten paused in his play to stare at the dark glass, ears pricked, nostrils flaring, as if he could smell every shadow. One afternoon, a break in the clouds let a shaft of thin winter sun push through. It fell in a bright rectangle across the floorboards. Ash stepped into it and froze, head lifted. The light turned each pale hair along his spine into gleaming silver, every dark spot into a coin of burnished bronze. His whiskers fanned forward. The wild in him, the part no human hand could bandage or warm away, seemed to rise to the surface. Pearl patted over and rubbed her face along his shoulder, nudging him gently, reminding him of the soft, purring world at his back. Shadow watched from his post by the door, yellow eyes half-lidded, as if he understood both sides of the pull, inside and out, hearth and tree line. That night, as Ben lay in bed, listening to the muffled sighs and thumps of 3 animals settling themselves on the other side of the wall, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not just gratitude, though that was there. Not just the ache of knowing nothing stayed the same. It was a kind of uneasy joy, a sense that his little cabin had become more than a shelter with a stove. It was, however briefly, a place where 3 different lives had met and decided to hold each other up against the cold. And under that warmth, like a seed under snow, another truth was beginning to press upward. Ash was healing not just into a survivor, but into what he was meant to be, a bobcat, a hunter, a creature whose true home was not woven rugs and cast-iron pots, but the dark, whispering forest pressing gently at the glass. The first really clear night came a week later. The sky had finally scrubbed itself clean, leaving a deep, dark blue you only see in cold country, with stars scattered across it like salt. The snow had crusted over, hard and squeaky underfoot, when Ben went out to bang ice off the satellite dish. His breath rose in pale clouds, and the woods beyond the campground fence stood black and still, like they were holding their own breath. Ethan had been by earlier that day, lugging a new little camera in a cardboard box. "If there's some fool sneaking around out here," "Might as well get a better look at his face," he'd said, climbing a short ladder to mount it higher under the eave. The lens was small and round, no bigger than a quarter, but when Ben checked the feed on the monitor that evening, the view was sharp enough to count the knots in the porch boards. For the first time, his old home security system felt like more than a formality. Inside the cabin was a warm pocket of light in the blue dark. The wood stove hummed softly. Pearl and Shadow were curled in mirrored commas on the rug, white and black pressed nearly nose to nose. Ash lay between them, longer now, spots stretching over leaner muscles. His ears flicked in his sleep at every crackle from the stove, every sigh of wind in the chimney. Ben turned the volume down on the radio and let the late-night talker's voice fade into a murmur. He rinsed his coffee cup, stacked it carefully in the sink, and was about to switch off the kitchen light when the monitor in the corner flicked from gray to live color. Headlights swept across the frame, too bright, blowing out the image for a second. Ben froze, dishcloth in his hand. The lights dipped and bounced, then steadied. A truck engine idled outside the gate, its low growl reaching his ears a moment later, a sound out of place in the careful quiet of the off-season campground. The camera adjusted. The glare shrank, and the front end of an older pickup eased into view, dark paint dusted white along the fenders. The gate chain rattled faintly as someone tested it. Then a shape moved into the porch light. The man was tall and narrow under a heavy jacket, a brimmed cap pulled low. For a long moment he just stood there, looking at the cabin. His boots sank a little into the snow, leaving a dark halo around each foot. Even through the screen, Ben could see the tilt of his head, weighing distance, measuring light. Ben felt the small hairs on his arms stand up, even in the warmth. He reached behind him without taking his eyes off the monitor and turned the lamp beside the couch down to its lowest setting. The room slipped into a softer glow. On the floor, Pearl's eyes opened to bright green slits. Shadow lifted his head, a low, questioning sound rattling in his chest. On the screen, the stranger stepped closer. The microphone picked up the faint crunch of each step, the slow, deliberate scrape of rubber on ice. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, then climbed them, one by one, until his face appeared in the camera's sweet spot. He was younger than Ben had expected, 40 maybe, with a lean, weathered face and a day's worth of gray stubble on his jaw. A cigarette burned between two fingers, its tip a small, angry ember in the cold. He took one drag, exhaled a pale cloud that vanished almost instantly, and then he leaned in toward the door's small glass pane. Ben could see his own reflection, faintly overlaid on the man's face in the monitor. Two sets of eyes, one inside, one out. The stranger cupped his hand around his brow to cut the glare and peered in, scanning the dim room. For a heartbeat, Ben thought the man might knock. Instead, the corners of the stranger's mouth tugged into a thin, humorless smile. It was the kind of expression a man wears when he thinks he's spotted easy money, the way people sometimes smiled at glossy flyers promising cheap auto insurance or quick cash. Then he straightened, flicked the cigarette off the side of the porch in a small arc of glowing orange, and turned away. The camera followed him as he went back down the steps, boots biting into the snow, walked out of frame, then reappeared farther off near the edge of the lot. He stood there a moment, almost swallowed by the dark, looking back at the cabin one last time before the truck door creaked open. The engine's growl deepened, tires spun, and the headlights swung away into the trees. Silence rushed back in behind the sound, like water filling a footprint. Ben realized he'd been holding his breath. He let it out slowly, the air feeling suddenly thin in his chest. On the rug, Ash had risen to his feet, fur puffed, tail low, eyes fixed on the door. Pearl pressed against him, and Shadow moved closer to both of them, black fur bristling along his spine. The night outside looked the same as it always did. Snow, trees, sky, but the shape of it had changed. Somewhere out there, a man who knew how to set a trap and smile at a locked door now knew there was something worth looking at in this lonely little patch of Oregon. Morning came thin and pale, the kind of light that made every surface look washed in milk. Frost feathered the inside corners of the windows. Ben stood at the sink with his coffee, the mug warming the flat, aching pads of his hands, and watched Ash pace. The Bobcat Kitten, no, not a kitten anymore really, moved from one end of the living room to the other in a restless line. His body had stretched out, spots pulled over lean muscle, shoulders rolling under his fur. He'd grown into his paws. Each time he passed the door, he paused and looked up at the narrow pane of glass, throat working in a silent swallow, ears turned toward the muffled rustle of the trees. Pearl walked at his side for a few steps, then had to trot to keep up. Shadow sat by the door like a stone, eyes slitted, tail wrapped neatly around his front paws. When Ash stopped, Shadow reached out and touched his shoulder lightly with one black paw, as if reminding him he wasn't alone. The knock came just before noon, 2 quick raps, then one slower, like someone who knew better than to surprise an old firefighter. Ben opened the door to Maya's worried face, her breath puffing in little clouds. "You saw him again?" she asked as soon as she stepped inside. Ben nodded toward the monitor. "Truck. Tall guy. Lean. Took a good look at the place, then left. But you know how that goes." "Poachers don't usually give up on the first try," she said quietly. "If he thinks there's game here, or word gets out, you've got a half-grown bobcat living room guest. He'll be back with a better plan." She shrugged off her coat, eyes going straight to Ash. The bobcat stood half in shadow, watching her, body tense, but not afraid. Pearl brushed against his chest. Shadow's tail twitched once. "He looks strong," Maya said. "Legs healed. Coat's good. Eyes are clear. He's as ready as he's going to be." "For what?" Ben asked, though he knew. Maya met his gaze. "To go home." The words fell heavy between them. The fire popped in the stove, and somewhere outside a crow called once, its voice thin in the cold air. "I brought this," she added, reaching into her pocket. She held up a soft loop of leather, more like a slip lead than a collar, "just to help guide him to the tree line if you want it. But honestly, I don't think you'll need it. He knows where the forest is." Ben looked at Ash. The bobcat looked back, gold eyes clear and unblinking. For a strange moment, it felt exactly like standing at the open door of a burning house, hose charged and heavy in his hands, the heat on his face, and a voice in his ear asking, "You going in or not?" He set his coffee down. "All my life," he said slowly, "I've carried people out of places that were trying to kill them, dragged them through smoke and glass, handed them off to paramedics, gone back for more. Never thought about what happened after the hospital, after the home insurance kicked in, after the life insurance checks showed up. That was somebody else's job." Maya listened, eyes soft. "This time," he went on, "if I keep him here, I'm the danger. I'm the one making him easy to find." He knelt, joints complaining, and held out his hand. Ash stepped forward without hesitation and pressed his face into Ben's palm, whiskers brushing the rough skin, breath warm and wild. Pearl leaned in, her white fur a bright streak. Shadow moved closer until his shoulder touched Ben's knee. "All right," Ben whispered, throat tight. "One more run then." They walked out together into the brittle afternoon. The snow had sunk and refrozen, a thin crust that broke under Ash's weight with small, crisp snaps. His paws left clean, perfect prints behind him. Pearl trotted a little way, then stopped, shivering at the edge of the porch. Shadow stayed at her side, black and white, watching the three of them go. At the line where the plowed lot gave way to trees, Ben stopped. The forest rose ahead, a wall of dark trunks and blue shadow, branches knitting overhead. He could smell damp earth under the old snow, the faint metallic tang of distant water. He crouched one last time and ran his hand along Ash's back, feeling the strength coiled there. "You were never mine to keep," he said, "but I'm glad you stopped by." Ash blinked slowly, then stepped away. No collar, no leash. He moved between two furs as if he'd known the path all his life, tail low but steady. In 3 heartbeats, the spots and the curve of his spine dissolved into the dapple of branches and shadow. Only the bobbing white tip of his ear showed once, then was gone. The quiet that followed wasn't the empty kind Ben had grown used to. It was thicker, like a held breath after a long, hard job finally ended. Behind him, he heard Pearl let out a small, puzzled cry. Shadow answered with a low, steady sound. Not quite a purr, not quite a growl. Something in between, ancient and accepting. Ben stood there until the cold worked its way through his coat and into his bones, staring at the place where Ash had disappeared, knowing he had just completed the strangest, hardest rescue of his life by letting the patient walk back into the fire he was born from. Spring didn't arrive all at once in the Oregon hills. It crept in quietly, like a guest who wasn't sure they were welcome yet. The snow retreated in thin, dirty ribbons along the driveway first, then in wide, wet patches under the trees where the sun could reach. The air changed too, still cold in the mornings, but with a softness under the chill, a damp, earthy smell that spoke of mud and new grass instead of ice and smoke. Life at the closed campground adjusted to the new season. Pearl and Shadow moved through the cabin like they owned it now, white and black shadows slipping along the baseboards. Pearl claimed the back of the couch as her throne, surveying the room with calm green eyes. Shadow took the windowsills, his sleek body a dark outline against the slowly greening world outside. Ben went back to his rounds. He walked the trails with a long stick, knocking dead branches out of leaning trunks, listening to the creak and sigh of the forest waking up. The creek, which had been a muffled rumor under ice all winter, sang out loud again, showing its cold green water between slabs of snow. The wind sounded different coming through budding branches, less like a warning and more like a conversation. Every so often, his eyes would drift to the tree line, searching for a flash of spotted fur he knew he wasn't likely to see. He checked the snow for tracks after each chilly night, and later the damp earth, but the prints he found belonged to deer and fox and the occasional wandering dog from town. No neat round bobcat paws, no Ash. At the kitchen table one afternoon, he thumbed through a stack of mail that had made its way up from the post office. Glossy postcards with sunsets over tidy suburbs, letters from banks, a thick envelope promising to simplify your retirement planning in 3 easy steps. Another offered affordable life insurance and health insurance tailored to your golden years. He snorted softly and set them aside. None of those pamphlets had a picture of a cabin with claw marks on the porch or a wood stove with 3 bowls lined up beside it. The nights grew shorter, but darkness still came early enough to feel like a full day contained 2 separate lives. The daylight hours of work and chores, and the quiet, lamp-lit evenings with the radio low and the cats breathing softly nearby. On the first truly mild night, he left the bedroom window cracked an inch. A cool, damp draft touched his cheek as he drifted off, carrying with it the smell of wet dirt and something wild he couldn't quite name. It happened on a morning that seemed like any other. Ben shuffled to the front door in his slippers, Pearl weaving around his ankles, Shadow sitting dignified in the hall as if supervising the operation of opening the world. Thin bars of light cut in under the door. Somewhere, a robin was stitching its simple song over and over, hopeful and insistent. He unlatched the deadbolt, twisted the knob, and pulled. For a heartbeat, his brain didn't make sense of what he saw. Then the shapes resolved. Right there in the center of the porch mat, arranged with strange, careful neatness, lay a small, still songbird. Its feathers were smooth, unruffled, blue-gray wings folded as if it had simply decided to sleep. Next to it was a little tuft of fur, no bigger than his thumb, soft gray hairs tipped with darker spots, clumped together as if caught on a branch and gathered up. The air on the porch felt cooler than it should have, touched by a memory of the night. Ben stepped out slowly, the weathered boards cool under his thin soles, and crouched down. The bird's body was limp but unmarked. The tuft of fur lay like a tiny cloud beside it. Pearl sniffed from the doorway, nose wrinkling delicately. Shadow stayed in the threshold, golden eyes wide, tail tip twitching. Ben reached out and picked up the tuft of fur between his fingers. It was softer than it looked, with that faint, wild smell he remembered from bandaging a shaking leg by the fire. He held it up to the light. The pattern was unmistakable, pale gray, flecked with darker spots, just like the coat that had once steamed gently near his stove while snow melted off. He didn't need a security camera to tell him what had happened, but he checked it anyway. Later, with a mug of coffee cooling on the table and the cabin still dim in the early light, he ran the footage back to just after 3 in the morning. The timestamp glowed faintly in the corner of the screen. At first, there was only the empty porch, lit in washed-out colors by the single bulb overhead. Then a shadow moved at the edge of the frame. Ash stepped into view with the slow, deliberate grace of something that had learned exactly what it was. He was taller now, ribs filled out, shoulders broad under a glossy, spotted coat. His tail swayed lazily behind him, the dark bars along it clear even in the grainy light. Between his jaws, he carried the small bird, feathers fluttering faintly. He walked up the steps, each paw placed with the same care Ben remembered from that first shaky crossing of the rug. At the top, he paused, ears flicking toward the door. For a long moment, he simply stood there, listening. Then he lowered his head and placed the bird gently on the mat. He sat back. Ben watched, heart thumping in that slow, heavy way that felt almost like it had in the firehouse, waiting for a wall to come down. Ash lifted a paw and passed it over his ear, smoothing a few loose hairs. When he pulled his paw away, several gray strands clung to his claws. He shook them loose with a small, almost irritated flick. They landed beside the bird and settled there. For a second, the briefest second, Ash turned his head toward the window. His eyes glowed pale gold, and Ben could have sworn the bobcat was looking directly at the dark square where he now sat. Then Ash blinked, rose in a fluid motion, and slipped back out of frame, into the deeper dark beyond the edge of the porch light. The clip ended. The cabin hummed softly around him, the fridge motor kicking on, the faint tick of the cooling stove, Pearl's tiny meow from the kitchen as she reminded him breakfast was late. Ben leaned back in his chair and let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He looked at the tuft of fur on the table, at the small bird now wrapped in a scrap of cloth by the sink, and then at the 2 cats sitting side by side on the floor, staring up at him with eyes that seemed to understand more than they could ever say. "Well," he murmured, voice rough but steady, "looks like one of my patients came back to check on the station." Pearl hopped up on the chair beside him, her fur warm against his thigh. Shadow took his place under the window, where he could see both the porch and the tree line. Outside, the forest went about its business, birds calling, branches swaying in a soft breeze, sunlight sliding through new leaves. Ben picked up the tuft of fur again and turned it over in his hand. It wasn't a contract or a policy, nothing you could file in a cabinet with your home insurance papers or tuck into a folder marked "Important Documents." But it felt, in its own quiet way, like a promise. Not that anything was safe forever. He knew better than that, but that what they'd done that winter had mattered to a wild heart that owed him nothing. The cabin didn't seem so small anymore. It felt like a little lighthouse at the edge of a bigger world, a place where 3 small hearts had once huddled around a 4th to keep it alive, and where that 4th had later returned, strong and free, to say in the only language he had that he still remembered. Ben stood, joints grumbling, and went to open the door wide. To the morning. Cool air slipped in, brushed his face, and carried with it the faintest hint of something feline and wild, already fading. He smiled into the brightness, one hand on the knob, and for the first time in a long time, the day ahead felt less like something to get through and more like something waiting to be lived. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Before you scroll away, tell me this. Do you believe a bond like theirs could really exist? If this story touched your heart, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might just remind you that sometimes the wild loves us back in ways we'll never forget.